we're going to talk a little bit tonight about lies. Just talk a little bit about lies. This has been a past 2 weeks or so. It's been, a great time to think about lies. I just am assuming, but by the size of the student population here at Oregon State, and certainly by the size of the community here in Corvallis in general, you have to be in one degree or another touched by this Muslim ban that came down at the end of last week. It just has to be true. I know there's this whole thing about it not really being a Muslim ban, but when the current president was running to be president, that's what he said: ban on Muslims immigrating. And so I'm gonna call it what it is. Just because people with power decided they need a more politically correct phrasing doesn't mean we have to change how we talk. So I'm gonna call it a Muslim ban. That's what it is. There's a lie that undergirds that ban. This is, and I want to be very, very careful what I'm about to say, because I said this on Monday, and the student necessarily and very, very intelligently admonished me, and just qualified it. When you look at, the countries that are banned, and then you observe that when you look at who's, actually been a part of the terrorist attacks that have happened, against Americans in this country, and you note that the countries don't actually match up with the actual terrorists. That's a clue that something's off. And I said I wanted to be careful about that, because even if they did match up, I would still oppose a Muslim ban. So I want to be really, really clear about that. But that there's something else, going on. And it's very important to understand how we got to this moment, how we got to a moment, of a Muslim ban. It's important to understand the kind of attacks that happened against people who weren't even Muslims. People who might well be Sikhs in the post 9/11 era. It's important to remember that the great slur that was used against the President of the United States before, Barack Obama, was that he was a Muslim. And it's important to understand that when folks said that, they weren't saying that, he took a special interest in the Quran. They weren't saying that, he prayed 5 times a day. That's not what they were saying. Most folks who go around and talk about Sharia law don't really know what Sharia law is. That's because they're not particularly interested in Sharia law. The point that these folks are trying to make is that the person is a stranger. They're not a part of this. Black folks know all about that. There's a lot of uncomfortable intersection between what's happening now and our own experience. You can start from the basic fact that some of the most prominent African Americans throughout our history have been Muslims. The earliest Muslim population in America was an African American population. It was enslaved Muslims who came from West Africa. Some of them actually literate in Arabic who were brought here in chains. We were the earliest Muslim population. Folks like later, into the 20th century, like Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, these people were very, very important, to African American history. So it's not to say that other people don't have a responsibility to speak up, but we have a special one. We have a special one, and it goes beyond that. What's behind that idea of a stranger? It's this notion that, people, who are Muslims are somehow, prone or somehow likely, or strictly because of, who they are, to want to do some sort of harm to you. Black folks have some experience with that. The other lie that came out last week concerned the killing of Emmett Till. These things are related. You may not see it, but they're actually related. They're very, very much related. The young woman who had, not young woman anymore, but young woman at the time, who had made the complaint against Emmett Till, who had perpetrated this narrative about him that ultimately led to his demise. And when I say that, I don't let off the hook the people that actually did it. But this was the narrative that was invoked, that, he had harassed her, he had grabbed her, said certain things, da-da-da. Well, it turns out that that's not entirely true. And she, after many years of being silent, finally, was interviewed. And she said, no, it didn't quite happen like that. And to her credit, said even if it had happened like that, nothing he could have done could have deserved, his torture and his murder. What actually happened to him? Why was the country so eager to believe stories that weren't told? It wasn't the first time. We have a long history of lynchings that begin in that pattern. And that's because there have been certain ideas adopted of African Americans as the stranger. Black people are one of the oldest ethnic groups in this country, arrived here in 1619. I always laugh, people, say, you need to go back to Africa. No, you need to go back to Italy. That's always my response. I've been here. I mean, not literally, we want everybody to be here, you know what I mean? But folks, just got here. Tell folks you need to go back to Africa. That's the power of whiteness, right? You know what I mean? You get to become a part of something as though, you were on the Mayflower. You get to be on the Mayflower. You was at Plymouth Rock. That's the power of the thing, right? Black people are one of the oldest ethnic groups in this country, but what's come with that is these ideas that are embedded. This notion that, black men necessarily are predatory, specifically towards white men, that black people in general are somehow, necessarily prone to criminality. And that these ideas are bone deep. One of the more horrifying things, I saw in, my research just to prepare to, talk to you guys this week, is that on the census, the community of Arab Americans in this country have asked to have Arab American declared as a race. It's not, horrifying to me, for why, Arab Americans would do it. It's not that, the action, I'm not horrified at them. When you look at the reasons for why these folks want to do it, it's not, because, for common culture, to have a culture registered. It's not, because of the food they eat. It's not because of music. It's not, because of certain beliefs. It is to document the acts committed against them. It's to document the housing segregation or housing discrimination. It's to document the job discrimination. It's to document the hate crimes. It's the thing that's done to them. And this points to a very, very disturbing thing that's happening right now. Race is being manufactured again. There's an argument I make in my book, and I'm just going to read just a short excerpt of it that's really relevant to this. And a simple point from Between the World and Me. Americans believe in the reality of race as defined, an indubitable feature of the natural world. Racism, the need to ascribe bone-deep features to people and then humiliate them, reduce, and destroy them inevitably follows this inalterable condition. In this way, racism is rendered as the innocent daughter of Mother Nature, and one is left to deplore the passage for the trail of tears the way one deplores an earthquake, a tornado, or any other phenomenon that can be cast as beyond the handiwork of men. But race is the child of racism, not the father. And the process of naming the people has never been a matter of genealogy and physiognomy, so much as one of hierarchy. Difference in hue and hair is old, but the belief in the preeminence of hue and hair, the notion that these factors can correctly organize a society, that they signify deeper attributes which are indelible, this is the new idea at the heart of these new people who have been brought up hopelessly, tragically, deceitfully, to believe that they are white. This riff goes on, throughout the book. Like, I never in the book actually say white people. It's always, people who believe that they are white. And what I'm trying to get people to understand in that passage and in that repetition of that, and then this, central notion to the book, that race is the child of racism, not the father, is that race is a manufactured thing. The theory of American diversity or, race politics or however you want to put it, holds that the problem is you have, these different races that can't get along. So there's a black race that comes out of Africa. There's a white race that comes out of Europe. There's an Asian race that comes out of Asia. Increasingly, there's a Hispanic race, and in America. And the problem is that these people are different, and because people are different, and it's not anybody's fault. God made us all these different ways, and we come together and we can't get along. And so the project of diversity, the project of integration is to get us to understand each other. Well, that's a very beneficial, a very self-centered or opportunistic way of looking at the problem, because what it means is that we didn't actually do anything. You understand? Racial conflict is just natural. I'm different from you, and so that means that it's natural for me to want to slap some chains on you and make you work in a cotton field. It's natural. Should have done the same thing. And that's how we talk about it. That's how we talk about it. But in fact, what the history shows is actually the other way around. The decision is made to take something from somebody first, to do something to somebody first, and then they become a race. And that's exactly, by the way, what's happening when you talk about Arab Americans right now. The thing is being done to them right now, and then they have to argue for a category so that they can, correctly catalog the things that are being done. But it didn't need to be categorized as a race before. The racism is actually what came first. It's important to observe. I'm going to talk, specifically about how that happened with African Americans tonight. And I'm not, I'm talking about it because it's the case that I know best, but I'm also talking about it because I'm trying to warn us away from doing it again. It's an extremely, extremely detrimental thing to say, to do in a society. So when I say there's no such thing as race, one of the things that, I lean on heavily that you have to understand is there literally is no consistent definition of a black race or a white race that can stand the test of history and geography. What do I mean by that? I'm here in Corvallis, Oregon. Did I say that right, Corvallis? Beautiful, all right. I'm nervous. I was at Willamette yesterday, and they was like, just think, damn it, Willamette, damn it. Just keep that in your mind. Willamette, damn it. You gotta make sure. You don't want to be like, thank you, Portland. You don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. So I'm here in Corvallis, Oregon, and I'm black. Very happy to be black. Proud to be black, good thing. Black power and all that. But what I have to recognize is if I were in Brazil, I might be something else. Had I been born into that society. Brazil got like 75 different things. It's a dizzying array of things, and all these things are supposed to be race. What I have to recognize is if I was born in South Africa at a certain period, that I might be called colored, for instance. What I have to recognize is were I born 250 years ago, perhaps, in, say, New Orleans or Louisiana, I might be called something else. There is no substantive biological test for what it means to be black. Anybody that has been to a family reunion for African Americans understands this. Because if you look across the cross-section of people, everybody has somebody in their family who, looks phenotypically white. I went to Howard University. After you get out, you should Google the first black president of Howard University, Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, and you'll be like, what? Ever look at a picture of Walter White? Not Walter White from Breaking Bad. Walter White, who was head of the NAACP, looked like a white dude. Just looked like Walter White, looked white. But he was black. He was black. There's no test across time that makes this the case. Same thing for white people. It's not like when Irish people first came to this country, they were automatically accepted. It's not the history of this country that when Italians first came to this country, they were automatically accepted as white. It's certainly not the case when Jews first came to this country, they were automatically accepted as white and given the privileges of being white. In fact, you can look at the depiction of Irish immigrants during the 19th century. I wish I had a slide I would show you, but one of my favorite ones shows a scale, and it's a caricature of a black dude, and there's a caricature of an Irish guy who looks like an ape, like he's made of very, very simian features. And they're weighing them on a scale, and in their mind, both are equal. This is somebody who has not been accepted under the umbrella of whiteness. Whiteness is a thing. Blackness is a thing. When we talk about race, developed thing. People have to do things to make you black. Decisions have to be made. I took a class when I was at Howard University, and it was the history of blacks in the Dutch world. And one of the most important things that my professor there did was he had an art slideshow. And he would show the portrayal of folks of direct African descent in European art before the slave trade. It looked normal. It looked like normal human beings. And once the slave trade commenced, in the 15th century, you can literally see the change. And you can see how these folks are depicted as others, as animals, as strangers, as creatures that are outside the human domain. How did this happen? African-American population in this country begins roughly around 1619. That's when the first group of African enslaved folks arrived in Virginia. And one of the interesting things is these are not the first group of folks who are laboring here in the colonies. It's a group of people called indentured servants. I know all my Phi Beta Kappa people here know about indentured servitude. But for those of y'all who ain't lucky enough to be Phi Beta Kappa, just a little quick note on indentured servitude. These were folks who, in Virginia who maybe wanted to come over and start their, life again and basically signed a contract to work for 6 or 7 years to pay for their voyage across the expense of their voyage. And if you look at the history of how these, folks were treated, you can actually see the nascent factors of what would come to resemble the slave system. So you see indentured servants, for instance, being beaten and flogged by their masters. You see masters artificially inflating the contract, making it longer than what was agreed upon. You even see masters trading contracts or gambling on contracts in dice games, much in the way that they would let us trade slaves and gamble slaves as though they were property. When the first group of Africans arrived here in 1619, one of the interesting things is, the theory of racial difference would say that these people immediately fell into conflict. That's not actually happening. What you have is a whole period of time where these folks do what any other group of people do. They fight sometimes, like any group of people fight sometimes. But they work together, party together, get drunk together, sleep together. That's how that African-American family union first began to look, how it looked. Even rebel together. But what you see slowly across the 17th century and into the 18th century is the development of a system of laws that begins to slowly strip away rights from black folks and award more and more rights for folks who will eventually be deemed white. And I don't mean like white just like as a descriptor. I mean white as an actual legal thing in policy. The right to defend yourself, for instance, is stripped away. Your ability to have property that can't be, pilfered and taken from somebody is stripped away. America was in a very, very, or the colonies were in a very, very interesting situation. You come from Europe where land is scarce, so you come specifically, from Great Britain where land is scarce, and you come to this country where if you're willing to take it from people, it's quite a bit of land. If you're willing to war upon people and steal, quite a bit of land. But what you need somebody to work that land. So what you actually have, a surplus of land, but you actually have a labor shortage. So one of the things that happens is people look at black folks and they figure out, that's it. I can have a bonded class of people who can labor for us into whenever. And that's when you begin to get the kind of policy to start stripping folks' rights away. And that's also when you begin to really, see these kind of stereotypes intensify. And race becomes a made thing, by which I mean, not just, you notice the fact that I'm darker than you. There are people who are black who are lighter and darker than me. I don't ascribe anything to that. But folks begin to draw a line in a certain place and ascribe, things to people. One of the things I always say to folks is, this one drop rule, this definition of blackness as it is now, as everything that, is west of this line, it didn't come out of anywhere. It's not like, some slave master was walking around and he just says, why don't we have a one-drop rule? It was designed that way to protect the advantages of labor and also access to the bodies of enslaved women. It was the master's, having his way, with women who are enslaved, and the children are produced out of that Well, those folks, if you don't have some sort of rule about this, they can't labor for you. They can't be re-enslaved. I can't actually enslave my own children again. So it's about preserving access to bodies for a certain class of men, and also about making sure you were going to have adequate labor. By the time you get to the Civil War, I mean, this is like I always tell people, America is not a country that had a little bit of slavery. And I think people get this in their mind. Sorry about that. That's not how it happened, man. Slavery was big here. They call the historian David Blight. He makes the point that America is one of these rare things in world history that we call a slave society, by which he means you cannot imagine America without slavery. It's just impossible to do. Folks often talk, and I say this all the time, they talk like slavery was, just like a mistake. Everything else we did was right, but if only we had not, done this thing over here. And, the description you get is slavery as a bump in the road. And I always tell people, slavery is not a bump in the road, slavery is the road. Slavery is the road. There is no America without slavery. I do not mean this as a rhetorical point. I mean this as an actual, as Professor Rogers would say, factual point. Factual point. If you went to South Carolina in 1860, you would find the majority of people were enslaved. If you went to Louisiana in 1860, you would find something around half the people were enslaved. If you went to Alabama in 1860 or Georgia, you would find something around half the people were enslaved. If you went to Mississippi, you would find the majority of people were enslaved. There were whole counties in Virginia where the largest slave population was, where you could go and something on the order of 70 to 80% of the people living in those counties were enslaved people. It was in a country that called itself a democracy. 4 million bodies, 4 million people in the South, enslaved until 1860. Collectively, these people represented $3.5 billion of wealth. You got to put that in perspective. It's just a kind of number that folks know about that. Think about it like this. I took all the banks in America in 1860. I took all the shipyards. I took all the nascent factories. I took all the assets, the entire productive capacity of the country itself, and I put it in one pile. It would be worth less than those 4 million enslaved black people. Bodies of enslaved black people were by far and away the greatest asset in this country. In 1860, 60% of our exports were cotton, generated by slaves. And that work wasn't, pulled from people, by, coaxing it out of them or talking nice to them. They didn't have a union, man. It was extracted out of them by torture. It was done by breaking families apart, by trading people. Something on 1 million slaves make the movement from Virginia, from the upper South into the lower South. Whole families just split apart. In 1860, if you wanted to go to the place where there were the most millionaires and multimillionaires per capita in America, you would not go to New York City. You wouldn't go to Boston. You wouldn't go to Philadelphia. You wouldn't go to Chicago. You would go to the Mississippi River Valley, and there you would find the largest concentration per capita of millionaires in this country. A lot of wealth. A lot of wealth. When I was, I guess a few years back, I went through this period where I was really into the Civil War. And I would drag my son and my nephew, my wife, to these battlefields, to the wilderness, to Petersburg, wherever. I was into it. I wanted to see it. And it was like a holy, mystical experience. It's something. To actually walk a battlefield. Something on the order of 600,000. And actually, they're revising that number up with 700, 800,000. There's some historians in here that could do it better than me. But they're revising the number up with the people who died in the Civil War. And you see, literally a field somebody, ran across, right into, a wall of rifle fire. But then you would, talk to these people about why these 600,000 people died. And that's when things would get a little funky. I don't know, states' rights. What state right? What specifically? In the Bill of Rights? What specific right? It's only in the context of like an economic institution that huge that you begin to understand what actually happened. You know, there's one way of proving the case where you can literally go, I mean, this ain't got to be hard. You can go at the documents and look at the articles of succession. The people said while they was leaving. I mean, literally said African slavery. It's not even, debate. I mean, we go back to this facts thing. The facts are really, really clear. But I think it's even more powerful on top of that to recognize why they were so dead set on declaring secession. And that's because the bodies of those 4 million black people represented a huge economic institution. Literally, that's what they called it, the institution of Africans. And they weren't joking. An entire social way of being sprung out of that. I often tell people, if you want to understand slavery, think about home ownership today. Home ownership obviously represents, as an institution, represents a huge amount of wealth. But more than that, it's a social institution, right? People aspire to be homeowners. You understand? Homeowners get together and talk about what they're going to do to their home. I'm not a homeowner, so I don't get all that. But I hear them. I hear them talking about it. Put an addition on. You know what I mean? My son moved out. I'm going to turn it into a study. All sorts of things that they can do to raise the property value. You're going to do something with the roof for their home. It's an institution. Enslavement was like that. Slaveholders got together and they talked about how they could wring the maximum amount of labor out of, these individual bodies. Sometimes, when I was, shortly after I wrote the case for reparations, I would go out and I would talk about reparations, and without fail, there would be somebody in the audience, especially when I was in the South. And they would say, well, listen, my great-great-great-grandfather fought, in the Civil War for the South, but he didn't own any slaves. He was fighting because, some folks came down. And I said, that's cool. I get that. I believe you that he owned any, that he didn't. It was a minority of folks that actually owned slaves in the South. But I guarantee you that he wanted to own slaves. Guarantee you. Guarantee it. It's not because he was a bad person. He's a bad guy. The incentives were set up such that the way that you accumulated wealth was that you bought people. And then you worked them to death. That was the way it was set up. That was the system. I'm sure somebody can analyze home ownership and find all sorts of, reasons for why it's bad for the environment, bad for this. But that's the institution we have for building wealth. Slaveholding in the South was the institution for how we built, for how individual people built wealth, and it powered the rest of the country. And it poisoned it. Because to maintain that, you had to manufacture all sorts of theories about race. You had to somehow believe that these people were less than. Slavery ended in 1865, and it's not like, we looked at folks and looked at those 4 million free people and said, okay, now go along your merry way and be happy. Here's access to democracy. Here's your chance to have equal rights. No, we didn't do that. And there are plenty of economic reasons for why we didn't do that. Folks actually needed, as much as possible to repeat this cycle of having, bonded labor. But on top of that was 250 years of telling yourself that these people were not human. 250 years of making them into a different race. What scares me now is the possibility of doing this again. And I know, maybe I'm being alarmist, right? Because it's a little early in it. It's only been 15 years since 9/11, but it's really, really important to remember this. When a group of people agitate to have race added to the census, they are telling you something, man. They're telling you something. They are making a statement about what their position is in the society. I lived in France for a year, and one of the things I was really, really confident in, was the fact that all of the horrible things they were doing to Muslim women that could never happen, much more accepted. No way. Couldn't happen. In a single stroke of a pen in an executive order, I think we have instantly become the most Islamophobic country in the West. Right away. Right away. You gotta watch this. It's a dangerous thing because when you start putting people outside, you start declaring people outside, different races, it's always the permission to do things, to do more things, more than you're already doing. Obviously, feel particularly, called to as an African American. I have a chance to be in the cultural center, speak specifically, to from the African American community. But I want to say something. And I don't usually do this. I'm not, big on big things. But I just want to say, the folks in this community, who are from the affected countries, folks in this community who have loved ones from the affected countries, I don't know if this means much, but I want to tell you that I'm with you. I want to tell you that I'm with you. And I feel you. I feel like I see my history being repeated again. There was so much, in my writing, I felt like I was prepared and I expected everything that happened, which more than anything, this was the thing that horrified me the most. And watching people in lockstep just sort of line up, watching Paul Ryan, watch all of these guys line up. Behind this is just, you will be shocked at how swift and how easy this can become normal. You'll be shocked at how hard it will be to actually reverse. Right now, it seems surreal. It seems exceptional. It was surreal at one time that someone who bragged about sexual assault on camera would be president. He's president now. He's president now. So I don't want to scare you. I don't want to alarm you. If anything, I want to inspire you. And I want to finish by telling you something that, I'm saying to all young people wherever I go. And I'm sorry you might hate me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. That's the job. I want to tell you that your vote matters a lot. A lot. Man, listen, I grew up in, the inner cities in Baltimore in the 1980s. And I was of that generation that, when you see that clip of Hillary Clinton, invoking the super predator, that was my generation. That was the people I went to school with. That was my friends. That was my brother. That was me. I was going into college in my freshman year when the crime bill passed, when Bill Clinton signed the crime bill. I was in high school when he went down to see Ricky Ray Rector be executed. Google it, please, if you don't know it. I feel this. I felt it all through the primary. I understand the frustration, but part of maturing is understanding that, as an adult, every day you have to make decisions that are not ideal at all, that may not, make you feel necessarily inspirational. That's part of being an adult. And your vote ain't no different, At the end of the day, your vote really, really isn't different. I was in Ames, Iowa on Monday, and a gentleman, and I felt it, man. A young man, he stood up to me, he said, listen. He said, what am I supposed to do here? I feel like, the Democratic Party is also, part of this legacy of white supremacy. I can go through the history and show you. And I said, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I done written articles that said the same thing, but I'm going to tell you something. Jeff Sessions ain't Eric Holder. That's just true. We started on facts. And we're very good at, talking about, facts that, other, from a different political perspective, need to face. And I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. But sometimes, as we mature, and as we, grapple with our own, political consciousness, some facts that we need to face. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Thanks.